NebraskaCERT.com, he's reading stuff like this. Computer terrorist enjoys the good life. This is a picture of Kevin Mitnick. You might not recognize this, but this photo was taken when he was on the red carpet at the Academy Awards. By round of applause, how many of you have been to the Academy Awards, huh? Oh, you've got to start getting into terrorism. Because this kid is flying around largely at our expense in the computer security industry. We are hiring cyber terrorists to tell us about how great they are. This is what Joe Sixpack sees. Now, if you're going to sit here and equate web defacements to cyber terrorism, that's not going to impress Joe Sixpack. The only question he's got is, do I duct tape my laptop? That's the only question he's got. And so I'm going to ask you this. What are you going to call it when Al-Qaeda really strikes us by computer? Someday the Air Force is really going to have to defend us from cyber terrorism. Someday that guy in a BDU right there is going to have to defend the United States from a real act of cyber terrorism. And what are you going to call it? Cyber genocide? You can't call it cyber terrorism. That's just vandalism. Cyber holocaust? What will you call it to Joe Sixpack? Now, remember what I said 4 years ago. If I was a terrorist, I would use you in the computer security community as pawns in my terrorist event. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some horrifying cyber attack that's going to freak you all out. And then, while you're all grabbing all the media attention, and you're all trying to get your 15 nanoseconds of airtime, I'm going to run out and bomb a nuclear power plant. That's what I'm going to do, while you're all freaked out. And then the grandmas and the steelworkers and the truckers and everybody, they're going to denounce you as gullible wolf criers who helped the terrorists unwittingly. And I told you 4 years ago, I can do this not just once. I can do it at least twice. Why? Because this kind of thinking here in the computer security community, they're so pompous and incompetent that they will let their pompous incompetence cover up their pompous incompetence. Oh, well, you know, the reason that Al-Qaeda went over this way is because that's a blended threat. That's the new threat here, and they understood how important it is for us to defend. That's why you got to give us billions of dollars that you're going to be spending on nuclear power plant security, and you need to give it to me to defend your grandmother's knitting needle electrons. And you're going to be able to do this twice, 3 times, 4 times, until finally either you grow up and get a brain, or until the grandmothers stop totally. And they say, oh, forget it, I'm not going to give you any money at all. So this leads us back to our unrequited love. We love Joe Sixpack. We want Joe Sixpack to love us. We want to protect him. Why does he love us? Why doesn't he love us? Why does he care about things like, soldiers dying in Iraq and Israeli airstrikes and North Korean missile tests and Angelina Jolie's baby pictures and Pirates of the Caribbean? Pirates of the Caribbean, that's 19th century terrorism, Joe! Well, this is 21st century terrorism we're talking about here. This is the kind of terrorism we're talking about. A 14-year-old in Malaysia could hack into our networks and force us to postpone our elections. And Joe, if we even let George Bush stay in office one day after his constitutional mandate, we're going to have to throw the Constitution out. A 14-year-old could do this from Malaysia. This is what we've been telling Joe Sixpack. Joe will love us someday, He's going to love us someday. Do you remember that Disney after-school special with the high school girl? She's a high school freshman. She bumps into the college senior. And, she falls madly in love with him, but, he doesn't really notice her because she's a high school freshman and he's a college senior. But she finds out that he's going to go to a bachelor party. So she stuffs her bra with toilet paper and, she, runs into the back of the strip club. But then the bouncer catches her. And, okay, that's a bad analogy. Let's try the Flintstones instead. I got the Flintstones right here. Let's go here. There was a family called the Flintstones. And we got Fred and we got Wilma. Okay? And one day, they did the nasty, and they had pebbles, okay? And they just wanted a cave with low levels of radon. That's all they wanted, okay? And then along comes a family called the Rubbles, and we'll have Barney and Betty here. And one day, they do the nasty, and nothing happens. So they do the nasty again, and nothing happens. And they do the nasty, and nothing happens. And they keep doing the nasty, and nothing happens. So one day they just give up and they steal a kid off of a porch. And they've got a family now, and they just want a cave with, they just want a stalactite over their heads too, right? Well, you know what happens? One day the Rubble kid, bam, bam, the Flintstone kid, and suddenly they got a tribe. Well, Dino doesn't have a role in this, but I paid $61 to entertain you, and I'm going to use him in here. But one day they had a tribe. By the way, we've got an Amber Alert out for this child. I don't know if you've gotten this all the way out to Kenya and South Africa, but we've got to make sure that we look for this kid in Omaha. Don't you love the internet when we can do things like that? So now, the gatherers, they stand up and they tell the hunters, hey, you've got to find a bigger living space. Well, Bam Bam, he kind of figured out how to knock the cave dwellers out of their other, out of the other caves. And one day they stood as an army. He taught them how to do the same, and they stood as an army. And that's when, come on, Rob, there we are. They stood as an army, and men began fighting on the land for the land. Men began fighting on the land to control the land. And then one day, they covered every part of the land, and it wasn't enough. And Wilma had seen a whole bunch of farmers using a newfound raft technology to catch guppies. And so she got the bright idea to put Fred and Barney and the others on it, and it promptly sank. And from those depths rose the term mil-spec. And they started running out in boats, and they became a navy. And they started fighting on the water to control the water. They fought on the water for water. And then one day, that wasn't enough. They covered every part of the land and the oceans. And so they thought, you know what? Let's go for the air. So they created mylar balloons. And then they created paper airplanes. And then they created gliders. And then they created jets. And that's when they started moving armies at high speed and high altitude. And men began fighting in the air for the air. Men started fighting in the air to control the air. And then one day, the Great Gazoo came along on the Flintstones. And I think we can all agree that when the Great Gazoo landed on the Flintstones, that's when the Flintstones jumped the shark. Right? Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, you know it. But he came down, and he's a scientist, and he noticed an observation between air and space. Space has no air in it. Well, the Flint rebels being the way they are, they decided to strap a pilot to a cone of a missile and launch him to the stratosphere. And men began moving armies into orbit. And that's when men began fighting in space for space. Man started fighting in space to control space. And now you're probably thinking, okay, Rob, we get your point. Men now fight on the lands and the oceans and the skies and the heavens. Now they want to control the internet, right? Wrong! Wrong, wrong, wrong. Yeah, a few countries do want to control the internet, but you don't care enough as computer security professionals to give your lives for it. That's the problem. You won't risk life and limb. Hey, guess what? A cyber terrorist uploaded a couple of snuff films to a state of Oklahoma web server. Did you risk death to stop it? Hey, guess what? There was a Canadian, 14 years old. We could have assassinated this kid if we'd just gone forward a few hundred miles north. He was going to destroy e-commerce in 2000, the Mafia Boy incident. Did you risk death to stop this? No. And this leads us back to this point. Land is the foundation of the state. Sun Tzu said this 400 years before the time of Christ. Land is the foundation of the state. Water, air, and space extend from the lands. And men are willing to die. They're willing to give their lives to control and hold these things that we hold dear. Now, in our time, Frank Herbert said it, he who can destroy a thing controls a thing. And terrorism spawns from this truism. Terrorists are willing to give their lives to destroy the things that we hold dear. This is where terrorism comes from. Now, the internet extends from the land. That's a given. But the internet does not yet underpin the foundations of the state. And it won't underpin the foundations of the state anytime soon. And that means men do not yet fight in networks for networks. Men are not yet fighting in computers to control computers. Now, we've got a couple of military people here, and I'll lay you odds they've already come up with this question. But wait a minute, Rob. We've always been fighting in information for information. Yes, we have. Since before the Bible was written, we were fighting in information for information. And technology has never changed this fact. So what's your point? You're talking to Joe Sixpack about defending computers when you really need to be defending information. Remember, back in the 1800s, when we first came up with the idea of dits and dashes and wireless radio, we could have never thought that there would be television. And then we got television, and we were fighting in information and for information. We never thought there'd be satellites. Then the guys who put satellites in orbit never thought there'd be the internet. Now we've got the internet. There's going to be something after that. And still, we're 6,000 years later, and we're fighting in information for information. If the computer security community would just realize this, they would understand what the Air Force is really doing. Now, we go back to this point. There can be no true cyber terrorism. There could be no true cyber war, as we all like to talk about, until the day you and Joe Sixpack are willing to give your lives to control and defend the internet. And this leads us to your unrequited love. It's not that you want Joe Sixpack to love you.